Hey, everybody. My name is Jay English, and I'm the cross-cultural coach with Plain English. And I am blessed to be here with Doug and Ruth Lindberg, who are a couple of physicians who are literally a couple. They are married, and they hung out with me. Maybe that was about 2 months ago. And we had a conversation at the time about the upcoming vaccinations. We talked about the coronavirus and some of the things that were being talked about, some of the trials, some of the studies. I was afraid about growing a third arm, and they put they put some of my fears to rest, which I was very happy about. As far as I know, they both have been vaccinated, and I don't see anything weird about them since the last time I looked at them, which is great to know. And, just really appreciative of both of you. Please know that. Again, Doug and Ruth were two individuals that helped us out with Kneel for 9. They oversaw a location in Brookfield with Embrook Church. And, I just want to give you two just a few minutes to kind of really introduce yourselves, who you are for those maybe that didn't tune in for the first time we were together, and tell us a little bit about your background, not just with Kneel for 9, but also in the world of medicine.
Go ahead, Doug.
Okay. Doug and Ruth, we both grew up in Chicago, and we met in medical school. We went to Loyola Medical School, and got married right out of med school. And those years were pretty formative for me in the racial reconciliation area, having grown up in the northern suburbs of Chicago in a pretty white community, and much more diverse in Maywood, Illinois, which is a near western suburb where Loyola is. I attended Rock of Our Salvation Evangelical Free Church, which was about, at that time, I think 70% Black and 30% white, and very intentional about just addressing and wrestling with racial issues. So that was really formative for me in my thinking. Ruth grew up in the city, and being a person of color herself, it was not quite as foreign to her as it was to me, to kind of start to have my eyes open about this stuff. So we did we moved up here to Milwaukee, did our family medicine residency in Waukesha, and then we served as medical missionaries in Nepal for 4 years prior to coming back here in 2013. And we're now here and attend Elmbrook Church. I work for Pro Healthcare and for the Christian Medical and Dental Association. I kind of split my time. And we have 2 kids, 12 and 9. They're great. What am I forgetting?
That's a pretty good summary.
If your wife says you do pretty good, man, that's the high praise.
Nailed it.
Yeah, and Doug said, I grew up in Chicago. My parents immigrated from the Philippines in the early 70s, but I was born and raised in Chicago with my 2 sisters. And right now what I do is I'm mostly at home. Since our kids were small, but I do work as a family. We're both family physicians at a worksite clinic in Waukesha, taking care of the employees of one company.
Yeah.
And then the way that we had gotten connected with Kneel for 9 and with you, Jay, is, when everything happened over the summer with George Floyd, and we just started wanting to learn and just wanting to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, and just wanting to educate ourselves and be educated by people who understand. And then we got connected with you and, started following Kneel for 9, started following the things that you were doing in the city of Milwaukee and, across social media. And when the opportunity in July had come to take part in a Kneel, we just said, this is a step that we want to take. We want to encourage other people to take to continue moving forward. And so that started our friendship with you and Sonia, and that's been really a blessing to us. And we're just really glad to be here and continue these conversations. And so.
Hey, well, thank you both again. And for those that may just be tuning in, again, my name is Jay English, and I'm sitting here with 2 family physicians, with Doug and Ruth Lindberg, who have been great friends. We've been doing work together. They have been really on the front lines in a lot of areas, specifically in this pandemic. And for us, this was an opportunity to have a conversation. And initially, it really started out around, hey, help us minorities and people of color figure out, is this something we should be doing? Because there was and still is some angst around vaccinations. We talked through the idea of warp speed and what that meant, or corners cut, and hey, how many people that looked like me were part of the trials? I mean, there was all type of questions in our first session. And at that time, the vaccines hadn't yet really been released. So now we want to follow back up and find out what has happened. If anything has changed. Obviously, I know that there's the Pfizer, there is the Moderna vaccination, but there's also the Johnson & Johnson. And, now that's becoming more readily available, not just to frontline people, but also to others outside of that. I know many elderly people who've already had theirs. I know that myself as a pastor, that's being brought to the forefront and saying, hey, now you all are allowed to come get this. And we want to take some time to just learn what you all can tell us. And if you're tuning in, feel free to drop some questions in the post. In the comments, we're going to do the best we can to try to get to some of those. And like I said, about 9,500 times last time, this is not medical advice. This is us giving you opinions. So that we don't sue us, don't call us, don't send me a letter. If you do grow that third eyeball, just put a patch over it and go to work. This is what we're here for, though, is to try to answer your questions, try to give you some insight. And just give us all a time where we can get better educated so we can make good decisions moving forward. So I really want to let you all talk to us a little bit about what has happened since the release of these vaccines and what you're seeing in your fields.
Sure. Okay. So the vaccine release process, it's been not 100% smooth, as you might expect with something as complicated as trying to vaccinate the whole population of ideally the world in as quick of a time as possible to bring an end as quickly as possible to this pandemic.
Yeah.
And the complications are added to by in particular the mRNA vaccines, which are the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, which require the vaccines to be stored at extremely cold temperatures. So it makes distribution of the vaccine really difficult and makes the logistics of it a huge challenge. And then in addition to that, the fact that for those two vaccines, it requires 2 doses. It means you have to track and schedule, and there's just a lot of additional layers of work that are involved. So that's been complicated, but I would say that, all things considered, when you think of the fact that just a little over a year ago, no one had ever heard of COVID-19, and here we are with a mass-produced vaccine that's highly effective, or a number of vaccines that are highly effective that are being distributed on the scale of approaching a couple million doses a day. It's a remarkable feat, and yet we all want it to go faster. Those of us who want vaccines or who want loved ones vaccinated, it can't happen fast enough. And so while it's been relatively smooth and there haven't been any unexpected or surprising side effects or anything like that have been identified that weren't known about initially, it's still, we'd love for it to be faster, but yeah.
But it is amazing just, watching the statistics every day. It's probably around 3 million people across the United States getting vaccinated every single day.
Wow.
And so it really has ramped up. Since the last time we talked, I think Doug was awaiting his first vaccine. I hadn't, gotten my appointment scheduled yet. But this is becoming more and more available every single day. And I know it depends on where you are, though, and that's been really difficult. I know even, Wisconsin is actually doing a really good job with ramping up access and making the vaccine available. but I've heard in Illinois that, just across the border, that some people are driving 5 hours to get a vaccine. So there's still room for improvement, but overall, compared to, a few months ago when we had talked, it's something like 20 to 25% of the population now has gotten vaccinated, at least one shot of the vaccine across the state.
And that's, and for people 65 and older in Wisconsin, it's actually 71%, which is fantastic, because once you're a couple weeks out from that first dose, even if you haven't gotten your second dose yet, your chances of getting really sick from this plummet. And so that high risk elderly group, having been, had that number of vaccines given, is really encouraging. So.
That is awesome. I actually checked in on my grandparents. I have not seen them in person and hugged them in over a year. So, even moving back, so I've moved back home, and which has made it actually worse for me. It was easier to struggle in Milwaukee. Now I'm like literally 20 minutes from their home. And I called and was like, hey, when are you getting the vaccine? And they told me Friday of next week. So that did all types of things for me. So I'm like, Sonia, hurry up. We got to get the vaccine. But, let me start with a question. There's 3 different ones out. And, when I received the information that I was eligible, and I'm like, okay, well, there's Moderna, there's Pfizer, and now there's Johnson & Johnson. And I don't know if there's a difference. I don't know if there's one that I should be saying, hey, look, don't give me that one. Obviously, there's the opportunity with, I believe, Johnson & Johnson, where it's just one shot. But some things need to take more time. Should I be getting 2 shots? I don't know. So let me start with that question, and you all just kind of give us, your opinions on the differences between them.
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer in a short. The short answer? Do you want a short answer?
Yes. Which one is likely to give me a third foot so I can not use that one?
So they're all good vaccines. Let's start out with that. And so, so we had Pfizer and Moderna first. And it was actually, I think all of us were surprised at how effective, what the efficacy of these vaccines were. So in the trials, they saw, I think it was about 30,000 people in Moderna, about 40,000 or so in the Pfizer trials, and the vaccine efficacy was 94 or 95%. And what that means is that whatever your risk was before, the risk after you got vaccinated, it decreases it by 94, 95%. That doesn't mean that out of 100 people, 95% get protected and 5% don't. It means that your risk has been decreased by that much. Sure. So with Johnson & Johnson, I think that trial was over like 8 countries across the globe, some of which these newer variants, which we'll talk about, have already gotten a foothold. And so in the United States, it was like 72% effective. Efficacy, meaning that it decreases your risk by 72%. Not that 28 people out of 100 get COVID. It's a little confusing with all those numbers and the statistics. But in other places, like where I think it was South Africa, because the variant there it's different and it can evade some of the immunity of the vaccine, it was lower. So when you see across the globe, it was 68%, but in the United States, where those newer variants hadn't taken a hold yet, it was 72%. But it was a different time compared to when Pfizer and Moderna were being tested and trialed, where it was the original strain. Right. So if all of these were going on at the same time, then we could really do a head-to-head comparison and say, okay, Pfizer is this, Moderna is this, Johnson & Johnson is this, but we can't really do that right now. Yeah, so it's tough. But there are, and I think there are relative strengths. With Johnson & Johnson, it is for some people that convenience of just getting one shot is really important. I think of older people who would be really hard for them to go out and get 2 shots, or if it was someone who it was just it would be really tough to get out of work or or whatever in their schedule.
Homeless people who travel a lot for work,
Yeah.
moms who can't, who don't have other places to put their kids, all these things where, that can be a big deal, the single dose bit.
Yeah. And then, if we had the luxury of time, that would play into it too. But, with some of these new variants, it is a big concern among the public health community, what's going to happen here in the United States if those variants start taking hold before we can get to herd immunity. And so if the more people who can get vaccinated more quickly, the less likely we'll get into another surge here. So I think if Pfizer is available to you, get it. If Moderna is available to you, get it. If Johnson & Johnson is available to you, get that.
Yes.
It's more when you have a choice, and that can be tough to kind of figure out what to do.
And it's all of them do a great job. So you talk about efficacy of just getting sick, but all of them do a great job of preventing you from getting really sick, hospitalized, dying. You're reduced. Your risk is markedly reduced, and so even if you get it, it's much more likely to be a relatively mild case, even if you have high risk. So, and I think that point Ruth made is about it's a race against the variants right now, and if you just get regular COVID-19, you represent a lottery ticket for COVID to make a new variant. So every one of us who gets infected, that's a lottery ticket for a new variant for COVID. And so if there's still a lot of people in that pool who are getting infected with regular old COVID, it's more likely that additional variants emerge, which can cause further problems down the road. So the more of us who can get immunized, the more likely we are to prevent the emergence of further variants. So it's really important to get this done as quickly as we can.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you all one of the first questions that have come through. And this is someone who is saying that they read that people who have blood problems may have some issues with the vaccine. And they're asking, do you know of any information or problems that people maybe have a history of platelet issues or platelet problems could struggle with this vaccine, or if they've had issues with heavy bleeding of any kind?
I haven't heard anything.
No, I'm not aware of that being an absolute contraindication to any of these. And so like all this other stuff, depending on your individual situation, we encourage you to talk to your doctor. But generally speaking, people with like hematologic malignant, like leukemia and things like that, these are still folks who would benefit from these vaccines. So, yeah.
Here's another one here, and this has been interesting because even when they first released the vaccines, one of the conversations was, even after you get vaccinated, continue wearing your mask, continue social distancing. And, I think some people have struggled with that. I don't know if that's still being pushed. So I want to get your opinions on masking after vaccination, and is that needed? Hey, if I get the vaccine, can I still get COVID? And maybe it's just not as bad, or does this, I think those are some of the questions that if you can provide any light on.
So with, they're still studying whether getting the COVID vaccine and just, if you can still get an asymptomatic infection. From what I've seen, that it looks promising. When they look at like Israel, I think it's like something like 90+% of their 65 and older population is already vaccinated. And then they look to see, asymptomatic infections that in the population, and that has gone, that the cases have gone down. But we just don't know that for sure yet. And so while we're waiting for everyone to get vaccinated, if I'm vaccinated, but you're not, I could still, if it's possible that I have an asymptomatic infection, I could get you sick. and then since you're not vaccinated yet, you could get really sick,
Yes.
but once you are vaccinated, then things change a little bit. So the CDC, was it a week ago or so, put out some recommendations on how do you navigate all this when we're still partially vaccinated. So if you're vaccinated and the other person is vaccinated and you're 2 weeks after your last dose. So for Pfizer and Moderna, after your second dose, 2 weeks later, or Johnson & Johnson 2 weeks after that, then like you can hug each other, you can like sit inside, have dinner, and all of those things. You don't have to wear a mask, and that the risk is really low that for everyone involved. Now, if that's, if you're mixing vaccinated and unvaccinated people, then it gets more complicated. So definitely when you're in public, because there's still so many people unvaccinated, still wear a mask. If you're in, a situation where there's more than people from more than 2 households, where there are some unvaccinated people that from more than 1 household, I think it is, Doug.
Yeah.
Then still, yeah.
Yeah, this was a new rule from the CDC that made all the grandparents happy.
Yes.
Who have been pining to see their grandkids. It said if you get vaccinated, and it's also making grandparents pound on the door and say to their kids, get vaccinated so I can see my grandkids.
Oh.
And so you have grandma and grandpa vaccinated, mom and dad of the kids vaccinated. Those 2 households can get together and be unmasked, and the kids can be unmasked too. And it's not that there's zero risk, If people are still uncomfortable with that, you can keep the kids masked or whatever. But the risk is felt to be such that's safe. And again, the CDC said that was okay to do, much to grandma and grandpa's delight everywhere.
Hey, I was watching some videos on the news the other day, and they actually had a whole segment of grandparents reuniting with their grandchildren. And I almost shed a tear. I got close. I was able to suck it up. But I can understand, I'm like, I'm a grown man. Look, when I get to hug my grandma, I might have to, have that little manly sob.
Yeah, do it. Let it go, Jay.
Yeah. So here's another one. I've heard you all mention herd immunity a few times. Can you help us better understand what that is and why that's even important?
Sure. So herd immunity is once the percentage of the population has attained immunity against a given disease or virus, that makes it so the virus doesn't have the ability to spread in the population like it would. And so when COVID started out, it was basically like a dry forest, where all the trees could be lit on fire. And when people have either the infection or get vaccinated, it's like firefighters coming in and cutting down these trees. And so they're not as close together, and they can't light each other on fire. And that's kind of the point of herd immunity is you've reached a point in the population where the trees are far enough apart in terms of who's susceptible to getting infected, that one being on fire is not going to mean the whole forest goes up in flames. And so with COVID, it's probably somewhere in the 80% ballpark in terms of needing people to be vaccinated or having been infected to have solid herd immunity, and when it'll really start tailing off and go away, or at least just become more of a seasonal thing. But that's the concept there.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I've heard it so many times, and I think I understood it, but that was really helpful, at least for me. We have another question that just came in. And so again, you got people, they scared of this vaccine, you guys. So this one here, great question. They're saying, how do I know that what I'm being given is actually the vaccine? Does it come in a special box? Does it come in a special vial? Is there anything or any security features that would help them identify what they're being given? And they use the example of kind of like the $100 bills have a special authenticity feature, so you know what it is. And, obviously I know there's been not widespread in any way, shape or form. There's been a couple of cases where someone kind of went rogue in the medical building and did some things. I think there's one person who left like a ton of vials out and they expired. There's been some other things happening. But is there any type of security feature? Is there anything that a patient could ask as far as verification of what they're receiving?
I know in terms of a security feature, while you're there, I'm not aware of that, like if you go into your pharmacy or something. But I do know that at least on the Wisconsin Department of Health Services website, you can look at, they have a vaccine map of all the different vaccinators in the state. So you can look at that and see who's closest to me, but then you know that that's a legitimate site and not just, someone doing giving you a fake shot or something.
Yes.
And so if you're not sure, like say if you find a place to get vaccinated and you're like, well, I want to be sure that this is an actual legitimate place, go to the DHS website of your state and look and see. I know that Wisconsin has it. I'm not 100% sure about other states, but that's at least one safeguard to make sure you're going to a legitimate.
I think too, well, first of all, to start answering that question, I'm just sorry to whoever it is that's asking that you've had whatever experience you have with the healthcare system that leads you to feel like you have to confirm this. It's sad that you don't feel like you can trust healthcare, and I don't know exactly what's behind that, but for what it's worth, I'm sorry for that. That's a tough starting place. And the thought of going through the door of a medical office and thinking that you have to confirm stuff like this, that's tough. So that being said, I think, like when I went in there, the nurse had a pre-filled syringe, but you could ask to see them draw it up. If it was important to you, you could ask for them to show you the vial. And I don't see any reason why they couldn't do that. It might not be the norm, but if that would make or break you getting the vaccine, and you could even call ahead to see if that would be offered at a vaccination site, if that's important to you. So, asking to actually see the vial might get you past that.
Yeah, thank you guys for that. I think that part of the question that was there that I missed, they were saying, especially for those that maybe going to like a neighborhood clinic or something that's been, I know that there's some places where there are like literal neighborhood vaccination pop-ups where organizations are coming in with a certain number of the vaccine. So I think that's where some of the questions come in at. So I can definitely understand that. In reference to something we talked about a little earlier, so there's a person asking, just for a little bit of clarity. So their question was, realistically, the vaccine reduces the symptoms and not necessarily prevents one from getting it. You may actually still be able to get it after being vaccinated, but it's very likely it won't be as bad. Is that kind of what you're saying? They're just wanting a little more clarity on that.
You probably won't get it. But we don't want to overpromise, right? You don't want to just bluster and say, you'll be fine. You want to be cautious with this because of the consequences if someone's unknowingly spreading it. And so you err on the side of caution. But there's every reason to believe, and again, based on some additional data that's coming out of Israel and other places, that it's doing a great job of not only preventing you from having symptomatic illness, but having infection at all. But the caveat is there may be some still asymptomatic infections, and so we should still be cautious. But it is reducing your risk significantly of getting COVID, most likely. So.
Yeah. And also the answer to that, with these strains that are circulating now, and so at least for some of them, there's a big question mark as to how effective our vaccines will be against specifically the one that originated in South Africa, which is, it's always like a letter and a big string of numbers. So it's B1351, which is not widespread in the United States right now, but it is the dominant strain in South Africa, and they have found it here, but it's not, there's not a huge spread. The one that's the most concern here is the one that originated in the UK, which is B117, which is something like 50% of cases in Florida right now are already that one over the original strains. And so, but the good news is that, what the researchers who are looking at our current vaccines to see if they're effective against the B117 one, the UK one, it shows that it does give good coverage to that one. But that's the strain that I think most people are the most concerned about here in the United States in the short term. That could cause another surge, and that one it's more infective. That I think it might be both that there's a higher viral load, that you have more virus particles that you could transmit to other people, and your infectious period is longer than the original strain. So there's more time to infect people that you're in contact with. And that also that they're seeing that it can cause more severe disease. So that's part of why we say, whatever vaccine you can get, just get it. Because, then 2 weeks after that, you're already starting to get protection, and we can get ahead of that strain and people from getting sick and dying.
30% higher mortality too. A small study for the B117, the UK variant. So mask up, spring breakers.
But just don't go to Florida.
Or don't go.
Yeah, you got me scared to go to Florida, period, right now.
Not yet. Just don't do it yet.
And
yeah.
The other concern, there's the P1 variant, which is the dominant variant in Brazil right now. That's another scary one because that's not that doesn't have as good a coverage from the vaccines that we have right now either. And it's important to say too that these vaccines they're working on booster doses or adjustments to them, and they'll be able to make those available a lot more quickly than the initial vaccines were. But it would if there's a setback, but it still would take time. So obviously we'd prefer those not become widely distributed around here if at all possible. But it's not like all hope is lost and we're back to square one if that were to happen. So.
Now, I know for a while it was looking pretty bad here in the United States as far as like ICU beds and the ability to intubate people, oxygen levels, being able to just provide oxygen at a number of hospitals. That was becoming a crisis. Have we gotten better? Have things slowed down at all? Tell us a little bit about what's happening in the hospitals.
We're in good shape right now, really good shape. And in Wisconsin, the COVID levels, there were like 500 some cases today. And there were still 15 deaths. Everyone who dies it's a tragedy. We have to remember that that's someone's grandma, grandpa, son, daughter, brother, sister, friend. And so you don't just want to get lost in numbers and say, 15, that's great. That's still a tragedy. Yes. And yet it's a whole lot better than it was. And again, hospital stats, we're nowhere near a danger zone right now. But we know that we could get there again. And the other hope and encouraging bit too, again, is that, as we mentioned before, that now with 70% of our seniors in this state having had at least a dose of the vaccine, that really is an encouraging stat in terms of protecting hospital capacity. And come March 22nd, high risk in Wisconsin, again, sorry to be Wisconsin centric here, cheesehead. But in Wisconsin, come March 22nd, high risk medical condition folks are able to get vaccinated. And that includes anyone with a body mass index over 25, which is honestly a lot of people. And so it really, that makes the point. It just will really make the vaccine available to a high number of folks.
Yeah. Here's another question for you all. And with this whole thing with COVID, why do you think children haven't been as affected? Which I'll be honest with you, thank God. That has been, out of all of this, that has been the saving grace, and I'm speaking to somebody, I've got a 4-year-old daughter here. And when I first heard about COVID and what was happening and they said, shut it down, like I shut everything down. We locked ourselves in the house. I was the only one who left the house, and it was literally to go to the grocery store. And I stayed away from people. I was doing everything. If I went to the grocery store and there was too many people, we're not getting food today. But I was more scared and fearful for her than I was for myself or for anyone else. So to find out that children, not that they weren't affected at all, but the likelihood of them becoming highly sick, and even dying from it was so much less than for everyone else. Why do you think that has been, or have they found anything out about why that is?
I couldn't tell you the details as to why, but children's immune systems are different. And
everything.
Yeah, and so there's different kinds. I think it's different kinds of antibodies that they will produce, to attack an infection versus the type of us who aren't quite those kinds of spring chickens, and our immune systems are all rustier and slower to respond.
Speak for yourself.
Hey, I'm younger than you are.
Yeah.
But so that's the short answer, is that their immune systems are different. But it also is important to note that there have been kids who have gotten really sick, and there have been kids who have died from this. It's a small percentage, but every single one of those kids is a tragedy.
Absolutely.
So, and then with kids, they're still testing out the vaccines in kids right now. So there's trials ongoing for kids 12 to 16, and then they're just starting the ones for younger than that. So it's still going to be a little while yet for kids to be able to be vaccinated, 16 and below. But it is important for them to get it, once it's deemed, once they know, okay, this is a safe dose for kids to get, and this is schedule for their own sake, but also just, because that herd immunity that we need to get to, which is like 70-80%, that includes kids too. So even if every single adult in the country got vaccinated, it's something like 20% of our population is younger than 18 or something, 20-25%. And so we need to get all those kids vaccinated too, to protect them, but the entire community also.
Ballpark timeline, junior high, high school, fall, elementary and younger after the first of the year.
Okay. And do you think this becomes something where, hey, you won't be allowed to attend school, unless you're vaccinated? I remember growing up, and you had certain vaccinations you had to have to play sports. You had to have to go to certain schools. And it was kind of, no questions, no negotiations. Here's what it is. Do you see that potentially being in the future for us?
I don't envy the principal that tries to enforce that one.
You and me either.
I'll back him.
Don't want to be him, though.
I don't want to be him or her. But that'll be. I like with my employer, for instance. My employer in clinic requires our staff to get annual flu vaccines unless you have a medical contraindication. But that same standard has not been applied for COVID, at least to this point. Okay. Now, will it be sometime in the future? I don't know. I'm not part of that decision-making process, but I can tell you that that's not happening right now. I think a lot of that just depends on what the new normal is a couple of years from now, and whether or not this is something that ebbs and flows a little bit, and boosters are needed, and you see little flare-ups here and there, or what. So I'd say stay tuned, but it's possible. Gotcha.
We've got another question that came in, and they're asking, as far as the reduction in positive cases, is it possible that our weather is playing any role in this? They're saying we've had a lot of interesting weather patterns nationally that have actually helped keep people indoors, which potentially is leading a lot of people not to come out and be tested. So I think they're trying to ask that question along the lines of, have we really gotten better, or is it more because of people just not coming out and getting tested?
I mean, the fact that the hospitals are empty would suggest that we're better, because there are less really sick people, along with there being less cases. And so and COVID is not a seasonal virus in the same way that influenza is, as is evidenced by the spike in COVID cases last summer in California and other parts of the country where it was beautiful, and so, while there can be some increased transmission when people are indoors or and in close contact with each other, it's not something that just goes away when the weather turns cold. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone can really explain why we are seeing so few cases right now, but it's a relative few. It's still in the United States, it's still over 50,000 a day, which is still a lot. But compared to over the winter when it was something like 200,000 cases a day. Sometimes we made a huge drop, but we still have a long way to go. Yeah.
Which is why now is not the time to let our guard down. Mm-hmm. Got to keep our foot on this thing's throat and we know everyone is sick of this. Mm-hmm. We're sick of this. We want to go see grandma and grandpa. We want to go to ball games and go to, do this, that, and the other thing too. And we're tired of being the bad guys too. And having people glare at us because we're telling them, they still got to wear the masks. But if we want to get out of this and not have further flare-ups, then we just need to stay the course a little while longer. So, and we can do it.
Yeah. Let me ask you something that's going to be more in line, specifically with churches right now. Many of churches, mine included, and we're meeting inside the building. Obviously we're still wearing masks for the most part. I say for the most part because everybody, I'm not trying to be the mask police. Most people wear a mask. Some people don't. But is there a difference between just normal interactions and conversations compared to groups that are coming together and singing? There's conversations around, hey, the worship team, or people who have, specifically in my community, there's a lot of times there's choirs, where you might have 15, 20 people, as opposed to a worship team, or maybe you've got 3 or 5 and they're kind of spread out. Are there some added risks to that still that we should be aware of?
Yes.
He's like, yes, there is.
There is. Yeah, anytime you're projecting your voice or like breathing really hard, then there's just so many more particles flying out of your mouth.
They go further.
And they go farther. Yeah. So with singing, acting, or anything where you're projecting, or if you're breathing hard, like you're at a gym, or you're at a bar and you're yelling, with that projecting, trying to talk over the television and music, those are going to be higher risk situations. So, say if you're in a church where you're in a choir, I know early on there was a choir where it was in Washington State, or it was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, I think, where it was like 80 something people in this choir. I mean, this was before masks, before we all knew what to do and what was going on. It was a significant majority of those people over like a 2-hour time period of their rehearsal got sick with COVID, and I know at least 1 or 2 people out of that group died, and that was early in the pandemic, but it is definitely a higher risk situation. So if you're going to be in a place where you are going to be singing or projecting your voice, then keeping that distance between people is really important. Wearing a mask is really important. And I know that's hard to sing with a mask on. but it's just another layer. And then as people get vaccinated, then, you're creating kind of those layers of protection around people, so that if you can be, 2 or 3 people apart from an unvaccinated person in your choir versus right next to each other, that decreases your risk.
And it needs to be a mask and not a chin diaper.
And it has to cover your nose.
Yeah,
it doesn't count if it covers your nose.
I was just about to ask, because
you don't get a B+ for it not covering your nose. That's an F if your nose isn't covered.
This is a pass-fail situation.
It's a pass-fail.
That is awesome. Well, you all, I want to say thank you just for your time and just for being here. We've got just a couple of more minutes left. I wanted to just give you the floor. Is there anything that you would like to say, or any last words you want to give, things that could be helpful, or just, something fun you would want us to know? And that could be anything about whatever topic you like, but I definitely want to give you that time.
I did want to put a plug in to a Facebook group that I'm part of. And this is for Wisconsin specifically, but there are Facebook groups like this across I'm pretty sure for every state or major city, but this is a group, it's called and I can put it in the comments section after we're done here, but it's called the Milwaukee and Wisconsin Vaccine Hunters and Angels Facebook group. And it's just trying to help people who, either are eligible or they're looking for ways that they can get on a wait list, if they're not eligible. There's over 6,000 people in this group, at least in the Wisconsin one, where people are asking questions, and other people are answering them. We're crowdsourcing information. There's people who just want to help, other people get vaccinated. And so there's already been tons of people in this group who have been helped by the information there and by the people who are part of it. So if anyone is listening to this in Wisconsin, join that group, and, people in that group will do everything they can to help you, find a place to get vaccinated, answer whatever questions you have. And so it's a great resource.
That's awesome.
I'd like to make a few quick comments about a question that we commonly hear about fetal cell lines and their involvement in the development of these vaccines. And for some people, it's a non-issue, but for some people, it's a make or break issue as to whether or not they'd be willing to be vaccinated. And so the use of fetal cell lines in vaccine development is very common. And these are, as far as the 2 vaccine or the 3 vaccines that we're looking at, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine does utilize fetal cell lines for production of the vaccine. The 2 mRNA vaccines, the COVID or the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, both just used them in a one step of the vaccine development for testing to confirm they work, but not in the production of the vaccine. And these are cell lines. It is not like active aborted fetal tissue or anything like that. These are cell lines from either abortions or miscarriages. In one case, they're not even sure if it was a miscarriage or an abortion, but either abortion or miscarriages from like 40 years ago. Where the cell lines have been propagated and kept alive, so again, it's not fetal tissue, and so again, it depends on your stance, and ethicists will come down in different places on this, but most would say. In fact, almost all would say that if you only have the opportunity to get one vaccine and that's all that's being offered at a given point in time, or it's all you can access, then you are ethically not just okay, but you ought to do it in order, in terms of the good that's potentially done by taking yourself out of having a virus that could potentially cause that much harm to other people. But if it's something that if that's something that is a huge concern for you, you could consult your denomination or talk with your pastor There's a National Catholic Bishops Association statement on this. The Southern Baptists have a statement on it. So those are places you could look for guidance. But out of the options, the mRNA vaccines are cleaner, if you will. But again, if you get rabies vaccine, certain hepatitis vaccines, rubella vaccines, there are multiple other vaccines where this is an issue. And it hasn't really gotten talked about, but it should be. I mean, it's important for people to be able to make an informed decision about this stuff if it runs counter to values they have. But this is not like fetuses being harvested for vaccine production or anything like that, or something that is kind of over evil along those lines. But again, it could be an issue for some folks, so that's an important thing to communicate.
Well, thank you. And I think just being able to pass that information along for people to have that is always important, and that's exactly what we wanted to do. I hope those of you that did tune in or that may be tuning in and watching this even in the future as it's shared and as others talk about it, that this information was helpful, that we tried to answer as many questions as we could. Always just a reminder that this is not medical advice. These are opinions. These are highly educated opinions, very much so. But we want to make sure that you understand that. And I know for me personally, Plain English was put together to do things like this. We wanted to bridge gaps. We wanted to bridge divides. And, people may ask, well, why would you want to have a conversation around COVID? It's like, because it affects all of us. Realistically, we are in this together, and specifically knowing that there was definitely, when this first started, such a disparity in deaths and the overall danger of COVID, specifically in my community, specifically in Latin American communities, with us being just that much more likely to have severe illness, that much more likely to die around it. The conversations with masking, just all these different things. And at the end of the day, we got to be here for each other. And that's what Plain English is all about. It's about having these type of conversations. And I'm so thankful to you two for being a part of this, for helping somebody like me overcome some of my own personal fears. And, I make jokes about it and I laugh about it a little bit. But in that first conversation we had, I was like, man, I don't know if I'm getting it. And, now at this point, just with the conversations we've had, my own studying on my own and looking at the benefits, not just for myself, but for the people that I pastor, for the people that I come in contact with, for those that I could be a carrier around and unfortunately infect, I feel like I have to. And I'm actually excited about doing it and playing that role. I told you all, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to seeing my grandparents who are 92 years old. They'll be 93 this year. And they've been in the house for over a year. My aunt has been taking care of them. And, it was kind of heartbreaking to come back to this area. My daughter, who was 3 at the time, she got to go see them and she put her hand on a screen door. And that was the best she could do, talking to them through a closed door. So we want to continue advocating, get vaccinated, do your homework. Absolutely. Take the information specifically that Doug just gave and you make a decision that fits your morals and your values. But at the end of the day, get vaccinated. Let's do this together. Let's get the information out. If you have influence, if you have ways of getting these conversations to the forefront in places where people can hear it, do so. Feel free to connect these two wonderful people. They are being an incredible help in a lot of areas. Obviously, Ruth, just with what you just told us about the online group. If you're in Wisconsin, definitely look that group up. If you're in other states, there are many other states that have similar things. So please try to find those and let's do everything we can to help each other. Feel free to inbox me with additional questions or things that I can help with. We're taking these conversations to wherever and whoever will be open to having them, not just these around the vaccine, but also in reference to just the cultural differences and the many areas that we're trying to come together and do better. So I want to say thank you again, Ruth and Doug. I appreciate you all. We'll stay on for a few minutes afterwards. For everybody else, thank you again for tuning in, for hanging out with us. Feel free, please share this. Please let other people know about it. This may be a huge help. And if we're not even taking this too lightly, this could be life and death for some people. So let's get this information out. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.